Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin. For those of you seasoned veterans of life, maybe pushing past 40, 50, or even 75, pull up a chair, because we've got a story to tell. This ain't your typical gunslinger tale, it's about grit, redemption, and finding something worth fighting for in the dustiest corners of the Wild West. And if you like what you hear, hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. We appreciate you joining our community. The wind carried dust across the wide plains, that gritty kind that clings to your throat and makes each breath a labor. Imagine it, folks, that dry, raspy feeling. Sarah had been riding hard for what felt like an eternity, 3 grueling days, her old mare barely hanging on, her ribs showing under a faded brown coat. You could see the exhaustion etched on the animal's face, just like on Sarah's. She'd come to this desolate place not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere else left in this wide world to go. Think about that for a moment. How many of us have felt that same desperation, that sense of having run out of road? A jagged scar lined her cheek, a permanent reminder of hardship. Her eyes, perpetually tired and dark, told stories of countless nights with little sleep and years of pain she never shared, never allowed herself to dwell on. Imagine carrying that weight, decade after decade. When she finally reached the tiny, forgotten town of Bitter Creek, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a hot meal, maybe get her weary horse patched up, maybe even find some kind of work scrubbing floors, anything, if anyone would take pity on a worn-out stranger. What do you think? Could she start over? Maybe she could erase her past. But fate had other plans, it seemed. She collapsed right outside the saloon before she could even find her footing. Now, Jack Harlow, a cowboy known far and wide for his quiet strength on the range and his even quieter demeanor in town, was the one who found her and carried her inside. Can you imagine the whispers that must have followed? Folks in a small town take notice of everything. Jack wasn't the kind to bring anyone home, much less a stranger who looked like she'd been through the ringer. But something about the way her body trembled, the way she muttered under her breath, "It hurts inside," too, it stuck in him like a painful thorn. Have you ever had that feeling of being irresistibly drawn to someone in need? He laid her gently on the narrow cot in his small ranch house, miles out from town, far from the prying eyes and wagging tongues. She was burning with a fever, her skin clammy, her lips pale and cracked. He brought her water, stripped off his coat to offer her some comfort, and tried to coax her awake. But when she finally stirred, her voice cracked like old, dry wood. "Don't, please don't hurt me." Can you picture that moment? Jack froze. What must have been going through his head? He wasn't a man who scared easily, but those words, that plea, shook him to his core. Was she expecting someone to hurt her? Days passed before she trusted him enough to speak more than a few fractured words. She told him her name was Sarah, but offered little else about her past. He noticed how she flinched at sudden noises, how she unconsciously held her stomach with both hands, as if she was guarding something incredibly fragile. She stitched his shirts to pay for her keep, cooked when she could find the energy, but she never once asked for more than what she absolutely needed. What does that tell you about her? Think about how much pride that woman had. And hey, if you're enjoying this tale of the Old West, don't forget to give us a like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. One night, a particularly violent storm rolled heavy across the plains. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the small house to its very foundations. Sarah jolted awake with a blood-curdling scream, clutching her side in agony. Jack rushed to her, trying to calm her down, but she was shaking too hard to hear him. "It hurts inside, too," she sobbed again, curling in on herself as if trying to disappear. For the first time, Jack felt compelled to reach out and lift her dress, not out of any impure desire, but out of a desperate fear for what he might find hidden beneath. And when he did, he froze in place, his breath catching in his throat. Her skin was a roadmap of scars, some fresh and angry red, some old and faded white. Her ribs bore bruises in shades of yellow and purple, a testament to past violence. Across her abdomen, jagged, uneven marks told horrifying stories of knives or belts, or something even worse. He felt his throat burn with a cold, hard rage, but his hand stayed steady, gentle, as if he was touching something so fragile that it might break with the slightest force. Can you imagine that moment, folks? Seeing that kind of pain inflicted on another human being? Sarah turned her face away, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. "You see now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I ain't nothing worth saving. Just scraps of what men already ruined." But Jack didn't move back, didn't recoil in disgust or pity. He took the blanket and wrapped it carefully around her, as if the act itself might somehow sew her brokenness back together. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady, "no man alive had a right to lay a hand on you like that. And I'll be damned if anyone ever tries again while I still breathe." She searched his eyes, waiting for mockery, waiting for pity, but she found neither. Instead, she saw only a raw, steady truth reflected back at her. "What would you have done?" In the weeks that followed, she tried to leave more than once, disappearing into the vastness of the plains. She thought she was too stained, too damaged, to stay in the warmth of another's care. She felt like she didn't deserve any kind of happiness in her life. But Jack always found her on the trail, never forcing her back, only standing beside her, silent and watchful, until she chose to turn back toward home. Each time she returned, something inside her seemed to soften, to thaw ever so slightly. The land itself healed with the changing season, the grass rising green again, the streams flowing clear, and slowly, painstakingly, so did Sarah. She still bore the scars, still woke screaming from nightmares, but now there was a steady hand to hold her through them. She cooked meals for Jack, laughed softly at his clumsy way with words, and she began to believe, just maybe, that she wasn't just broken pieces after all. And Jack, he carried her pain like his own, never demanding explanations, never rushing her healing. He was just there, solid and unwavering. A man who'd spent his whole life riding alone, now found the greatest strength, not in his fists or his gun, but in the quiet vow he made the night he froze with her dress lifted, that he'd protect the heart beating under those scars, no matter how many storms came their way. Because sometimes, in the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, salvation wasn't found in the law, or the land, or even the church bell ringing at sundown. It was in the simple, fierce truth that even the most wounded soul could be worth more than all the gold in the world to the right man. Now, the rain had left the earth soft, mud clinging to the hooves of Jack's horse as he returned from checking the fences. The ranch house sat quiet in the distance, a wisp of smoke curling from the chimney, a promise of warmth and shelter. Inside, Sarah stood by the fire, her face lit by the orange glow, holding one of Jack's shirts in her hands. She was mending a tear along the sleeve, her needle flashing in and out with careful, precise strokes. Each stitch was placed with thought, and time was taken in her effort to fix the clothing. When she heard the door open, her shoulders tensed reflexively, a habit born of fear. But then she saw him standing there, framed in the doorway, and she let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't need to fix that," Jack said, setting his hat on the peg by the door. His voice was calm, a steady drawl that always managed to soothe her frayed nerves. "You tear through shirts faster than a coyote through a chicken coop," she replied softly, her eyes dropping back to her work, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was almost playful, the most playful she had been. Jack chuckled under his breath, moving to warm his hands by the fire. He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to do anything at all, that she was free to rest, free to just be. But he knew better than to press her. She needed to feel useful, needed to carve a place for herself in this quiet life, to prove she could contribute. And so, he let her, standing beside her without another word, content to share the simple comfort of her presence. "Hey there. Do you want to hear the end of the story? Then smash that like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin." Later, when the wind died down and the night pressed close around them, Sarah sat awake, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing. Jack heard her tossing and turning, caught the sound of her sharp, uneven breaths. He rose silently from his bedroll in the corner and sat at the edge of her cot. "Another dream?" he asked gently. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze, shame and fear warring within her. What was it this time? She swallowed hard, her throat working, but no words came. He wanted to help her. Finally, she whispered one word, him. Jack didn't need her to explain further. He'd seen enough scars to know that someone had laid claim to her body in ways more cruel than he could stomach. His fists clenched on his knees, but he forced the rage back down. Anger wouldn't heal her, only time and unwavering patience could do that. He whispered, "Look at me, Sarah." She did turn to him. "Sarah," he said urgently. She turned, her eyes glassy with unshed tears, trembling in the flickering firelight. "You're safe here," he reassured her. "Whatever he did, it ends here. You got my word on that." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, she reached for his hand, her touch as tentative as a bird landing on a fragile branch. Jack let her, their fingers brushing lightly at first, then intertwining. For the first time since she'd stumbled into Bitter Creek, she didn't feel completely hollow inside. Are you cheering for Jack and Sarah? Make sure to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. The days grew longer as spring painted the plains with life. Sarah found herself wandering the fields, the tall grass brushing against her skirts, the sky white and endless overhead. She hadn't known that peace could feel like this, quiet, uninterrupted. No footsteps following her, no harsh commands shouted at her back. Jack worked nearby, mending a fence post, his hat pulled low over his brow, his presence a comforting reassurance. He let her wander around as she was a flower dancing in the wind. He didn't intrude, didn't demand conversation. But when she glanced his way, she saw the steadiness in his eyes, the kind of strength that didn't break things, but held them together. One afternoon, as she gathered water from the well, a wagon rolled up the dusty road, kicking up a cloud of dust and anticipation. It was Mary Collins from town, her sharp eyes narrowing with curiosity and a hint of disapproval when she spotted Sarah. "So, it's true," Mary said, her lips pursed in a disapproving line. "You're living out here now with Jack Harlow." Sarah stiffened, clutching the handle of the heavy bucket. "I'm just working," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Working?" Mary repeated with a hint of scorn. "Folks are saying different. They think he's brought home some saloon girl, maybe worse. You ought to be careful, miss. A reputation don't wash clean once it's stained." Did you see the look in Mary's eyes? Sarah's stomach twisted into knots, shame flooding her veins. She turned her face away, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. When Mary left, the sound of the wagon fading down the road, Sarah stood frozen, the bucket feeling unbearably heavy in her hands. Jack found her later sitting on the steps with her head in her arms, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "She was right," Sarah whispered when he gently asked what was wrong. "They'll never see me as anything but dirty." Jack crouched in front of her, his eyes level with hers, his gaze unwavering. "Let them talk. Bitter Creek's been gossiping since the day it was built. None of them know you, Sarah. None of them know what you've been through, and none of them get to decide what you're worth." Her tears spilled over, silent and hot. "But I ain't clean, Jack, not inside. It still hurts, and I can't make it stop." His hand hovered for a moment before he laid it gently against her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear with surprising tenderness. "You don't have to make it stop," he said softly. "You just got to let it heal, little by little. And I'll be right here until it does." That night, Sarah lay awake again, but this time, her thoughts weren't just of fear and pain. They were of Jack, his patience, his quiet strength, the way he never looked at her scars like they were ugly or shameful. She turned those thoughts over and over in her mind, like a stone smoothed by a river, until sleep finally came without tears. You've made it far into our story today. If you want to hear more, make sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Weeks turned into months. She began humming while she worked, soft little tunes that drifted through the house, filling the silence with a fragile kind of joy. Jack noticed, though he never said a word, just listened quietly, as though it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. She planted flowers by the porch, their colors a vibrant splash against the rough, weathered wood, a symbol of life and hope blooming in a barren landscape. She was mending more than just shirts, she was mending herself, piece by fragile piece. But healing was never a straight path. One evening, when Jack returned late from town, Sarah panicked. She'd paced the floor, consumed by fear, convinced that he wasn't coming back, that he'd left her like all the rest. When he finally walked through the door, carrying a sack of flour and coffee beans, she flew at him, her fists pounding against his chest, tears streaming down her face. "You can't just disappear like that," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "You can't leave me wondering if you're gone for good." Jack caught her wrists, not harshly, but firm enough to still her trembling. "I wasn't leaving, Sarah. I just went to town for supplies. I should have told you, you're right." She sagged against him, sobbing into his shirt, her body racked with tremors. He held her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, until the storm inside her passed. Later, when she'd calmed, she whispered into his chest, "I don't know how to trust this. I don't know how to believe you won't hurt me." Jack kissed the top of her hair, his lips lingering there. "Then I'll spend as long as it takes proving it to you," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "Every damn day if I have to." The summer came hot, the cattle restless in the sweltering heat. Jack worked long hours on the range, and Sarah often rode out with him, learning to guide the herd, her fear slowly giving way to a newfound confidence. Her laughter carried on the wind when a calf broke free, and she managed to wrangle it back, her face flushed with triumph. She was strong, Jack saw that now, not just surviving, but truly living. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Sarah sat beside Jack on the porch, the quiet intimacy a precious gift. She leaned into him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, the weight of her trust a profound honor. "When you lifted my dress that night," she said quietly, her voice barely audible, "I thought I'd die from the shame of it. I thought you'd turn away, just like everyone else always had." Jack's jaw tightened with a surge of protective anger. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and fierce, "I didn't freeze because of shame. I froze because I'd never seen someone hurt so bad and still stand so tall. You ain't weak. You're the bravest damn person I've ever known." Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned her face up to his, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the silence deep and steady as the land around them, a silent language of understanding and acceptance passing between them. Then she reached up, hesitating only a second before pressing her lips softly against his. It wasn't a kiss of hunger or claim, but a kiss of trust, fragile and tender, a promise of something more to come. Jack's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch as gentle as the night air. When they parted, Sarah's heart raced, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear, but from hope. Friends, the rest of the story is coming right up, but first make sure you subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Life on the ranch wasn't easy, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of shared pain and unwavering commitment. Sarah found joy in the small things, the smell of bread baking in the oven, the sound of the creek babbling over smooth stones, the warmth of Jack's hand brushing against hers when they worked side by side. The scars never disappeared, and the hurt never fully left, but she learned something she never thought possible, that pain didn't have to define her. And Jack, true to his word, never let her forget that she was more than what had been done to her. He showed her in every quiet act of kindness, every steady glance of reassurance, every promise kept. Because sometimes, in the wild, untamed land of the West, the fiercest battles weren't fought with guns or fists, but with patience, gentleness, and the kind of love strong enough to stand against every shadow of the past. The cicadas hummed loud in the summer heat, a constant drone that blended with the other sounds of the ranch. Sarah found herself out near the barn, hanging laundry on the line, her movements almost automatic. The wind caught at the clean white sheets, snapping them like sails, and she smiled faintly, remembering how she used to do this as a girl, before the world turned dark and cruel. For a moment, she felt almost normal, almost free. But then a rider appeared at the edge of the property, dust rising behind the thundering hooves, and her fragile piece shattered like glass. Sarah froze, the clothes pin slipping from her numb fingers, her heart seizing with a primal fear. A man dismounted, tall and broad, his hat pulled low to shield his face from the sun. He walked with the easy swagger of someone who thought the world owed him everything, his every step oozing with arrogance. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled, his voice a cruel whisper that seemed to slither across the open space. "If it ain't little Sarah." Her blood ran cold, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that voice, that sneering tone, all too well. It was Tom Rollins, the man who'd once owned her in every way a man could, the man she'd spent years running from. Her vision blurred, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her, the weight of her past crashing down on her with crushing force. "You thought you could run, did you?" he said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "But I always find what's mine." Sarah backed away, shaking her head in denial. "You don't belong here, Tom. Just leave me alone." "Don't belong?" he sneered, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "You belong to me, girl, from the first night I laid eyes on you. Always have, always will." His gaze slid down her body like a knife, leaving a trail of violation in its wake. "Looks like Jack Harlow's been enjoying what I broke in first." A tear trickled down her face. Before Sarah could answer, before she could even scream, Jack stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. His face was calm, almost expressionless, but his eyes were hard as steel, radiating a silent warning. "You're trespassing," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "Best you leave now." Tom smirked, his eyes locked on Sarah. "She's mine," he said, his voice dripping with possessive cruelty. "Ain't no law out here says otherwise." Jack dropped the rag, straightening to his full height, his body radiating a quiet power that made the air crackle with tension. "Law or not, she ain't yours." "She never was," he said, his voice unwavering. "And if you take one more step onto my land, I'll put you in the ground." The silence stretched, broken only by the flapping of the clean white sheets on the line, a stark contrast to the ugliness unfolding before them. Tom looked from Jack to Sarah, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Jack wasn't bluffing, and Tom knew it. He spat again, muttered something foul under his breath, and swung up onto his horse with a grunt. "This ain't over," he growled, his eyes burning with hatred as he wheeled his horse around and rode off in a storm of dust. Sarah collapsed, her body shaking so violently she couldn't breathe, the world spinning around her. Jack was there in an instant, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his shirt, sobbing uncontrollably, every wound of the past ripped open and bleeding anew. "I can't," she choked out between sobs. "I can't keep running. It'll never stop." Jack held her tighter, his jaw set with grim determination. "Then we don't run. We stand right here and face it together. And hey there folks. I hope you're loving the story. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin." That night, Sarah sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flames, her mind haunted by the memories of Tom Rollins. Jack cleaned his rifle at the table, his movements slow and methodical, the way a man worked when he meant every motion. She watched him, guilt gnawing at her. "You didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice laced with regret. Jack didn't look up. "Didn't ask for cattle rustlers either," he said, his voice calm and even. But when they come, you deal with it. This is different, she protested, her voice cracking with emotion. I'm different. Broken, damaged. Jack set the rifle down and finally met her eyes, his gaze unwavering. Sarah, I don't give a damn about the scars, he said, his voice rough with sincerity. You think I see weakness when I look at you, but I see a woman who survived hell and still finds the strength to get up every day. That ain't broken. That's stronger than most men I've ever known. Her throat tightened, words failing her. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her past was heavy, chains she couldn't seem to shake. Still, something in his voice, firm and unyielding, lodged deep inside her, like a seed planted in barren ground, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Days turned to weeks. Tom Rollins didn't show his face again, but his shadow lingered, a constant threat hanging over them. Sarah flinched at every rider on the horizon, every creak of the door at night, her senses on high alert. Jack stayed close, not hovering or suffocating, but steady, an anchor when she drifted too far into fear. One afternoon, they rode into town for supplies, and the whispers started almost immediately, growing louder with each step they took. Sarah walked beside Jack down Main Street, her head low, feeling the weight of countless eyes burning into her back, judging and condemning. Two women stood gossiping outside the mercantile, their voices carefully raised just enough for her to hear. That's her, isn't it? The one who used to work at Rollins's place. Folks say she was his, __. Sarah's chest constricted, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the blood pounding in her ears. She nearly dropped the sack of flour she was carrying, shame flooding through her like a tidal wave. But then Jack's hand settled lightly on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support and defiance. He turned his head just enough for the women to see the hard glint in his eyes, a silent warning that brooked no argument. They went silent instantly, their eyes darting away, their whispers dying in their throats. Outside, Sarah stopped, trembling, her body rigid with humiliation. They'll never let me forget, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. No matter what I do, they'll always see me as nothing but that. Jack took the sack of flour from her hands, setting it gently in the wagon. Then let them choke on their own bitter words, he said, his voice filled with quiet contempt. You don't answer to them, Sarah. You don't answer to Rollins. You answer to yourself, and to no one else. She stared at him, tears brimming in her eyes, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and despair. And to you, she added softly, her voice barely audible. Jack's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reassuring. No, Sarah. You don't owe me nothing. But if you choose to be with me, if you stay here, it's because you want to, not because you feel like you have to. Her lips trembled, a sob caught in her throat, the weight of his words settling heavily upon her. That night, she kissed him again, longer and deeper than before, and this time it wasn't just a kiss of trust, but a kiss of choice, a declaration of her own free will. The seasons shifted once more, the leaves turning gold and crimson, the nights growing colder and longer, and Sarah continued to heal, her spirit slowly mending like a broken wing. She worked alongside Jack without fear of the sweat on her brow or the ache in her muscles, her body strong and capable. She found herself laughing more often, her voice freer and more genuine, the sound echoing through the canyons like a song. The nightmares still came, but now she woke to Jack's arms around her, his steady voice grounding her, reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues, Sarah took a long, shaky breath and finally spoke the words she'd been holding inside for so long. When you lifted my dress that night, she said, her voice barely a whisper, I thought you'd look at me with disgust, that you'd see me as ruined and worthless. But you didn't. And every day since, you've shown me that I'm not what he made me, that I'm more than just my scars. Jack's gaze was steady and unwavering, his voice low and filled with a deep, abiding love. Sarah, he didn't make you, he said, his words ringing with truth and conviction. He hurt you, but he never owned you. You're yours, Sarah. Always were, always will be. Her tears fell silently, but this time they weren't just tears of pain and sorrow, but tears of release, of gratitude, of hope. She leaned into him, the warmth of his arm a comforting presence, the sound of the crickets chirping in the night a lullaby of peace. For the first time since she was a girl, she felt something bloom inside her, a sense of hope not fragile and fleeting, but strong and deeply rooted, like the ancient land itself. And though the past would always haunt her, though the scars would always remain, she knew now that she was more than her pain, more than her fear, more than the sum of her past experiences. She was alive, she was loved, and she would never again be anyone's possession. And that's our tale for today, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more stories of the Old West, make sure to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. The wind rattled the shutters that night, keeping Sarah restless and awake. She laid in her bed, her mind racing. She listened to the coyotes calling in the distance. Her hand pressed over the scars on her ribs. The memory of Tom Rollins' face when he rode onto the ranch would not leave her, not tonight. His eyes had been the same as they always were, hungry, cruel, and certain he could bend her until she broke. She hated that just the sound of his voice still made her blood run cold. Jack lay on his bedroll nearby, but she knew he wasn't asleep either. His breathing was too steady and deliberate. "Do you think he'll come back?" she whispered into the dark. "Yes," Jack said simply, her stomach clenched. "What will we do?" she whispered to him urgently. "What we always do. We'll stand," he answered, his voice calm as stone. It should have comforted her, but instead she felt a trembling deep in her chest. Standing had always meant getting knocked down. Men like Tom didn't let go. They hunted until they had what they wanted. When dawn came, Sarah busied herself with chores. She kneaded bread, fetched water, and scrubbed the floors until her hands ached. She tried to lose herself in the rhythm, but every shadow seemed sharper. Every sound like hoof beats. By noon, she was so wound up she spilled a bucket of water across the porch. Jack found her kneeling there, shaking, water soaking through her skirts. He crouched beside her and gently lifted her chin. "You don't have to scrub the fear out, Sarah. Let it sit, let it burn, but don't let it rule you." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand." "I do," he said firmly. "Maybe not the same way, but I've known fear. I've carried it. The only way to keep walking is to face it head on." She stared at him, her eyes filling. Slowly, she nodded, but the knot inside her didn't loosen. A week later, the town gathered for Sunday service at the little church. Jack insisted Sarah come with him, even though she resisted. "They'll just stare," she murmured. "Let them," Jack said. "Ain't none of their stares got power over you?" So she went, her heart hammering as they walked through the doors. Whispers fluttered immediately. She felt them like needles against her skin, but Jack's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, steadying her, guiding her to a pew. He didn't speak and didn't make a show, but his presence beside her was a shield. The sermon was a blur. She barely heard the words. She was too aware of the eyes, the quiet judgment, and the memory of Mary Collins' sharp tongue. But when the service ended, something unexpected happened. An older woman named Martha stepped forward. She had lost her husband to fever years ago, and she lived alone at the edge of town. She pressed a loaf of bread into Sarah's hands. "Don't mind the chatter," Martha said softly. "I know what it is to be talked about. Folks will come around. Just keep your chin up." Sarah blinked, startled. She nodded, clutching the bread, and for the first time, she felt a small crack in the wall of scorn. Maybe not everyone saw her as ruined, but peace was short-lived. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a rider came fast down the road. Jack stepped out onto the porch before the dust even settled. It was Sheriff Cale, his face grim. "Rollins is back in town," the sheriff said. "Been drinking hard at the saloon and running his mouth about what's his. I can't keep him from talking, Jack, but I can't let this boil over either." Jack's jaw clenched. "You know damn well she ain't his." The sheriff sighed. "I know, but words turn to fists and fists turn to guns. Don't let it come to that if you can help it." When the sheriff rode away, Sarah stood in the doorway, pale as linen. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He'll come here." Jack crossed the porch in 2 strides, pulling her against him. "Then he'll have to go through me." The days that followed were tense. Sarah jumped at every hoofbeat, every creak of the barn. Jack moved through the ranch like a shadow, quiet but watchful, and his rifle always within reach. Sarah hated that her presence brought danger to his doorstep, but he never once looked at her with blame, only with the same steady calm, like he'd already decided she was worth the fight. One evening, Sarah finally told him the whole truth. They sat by the fire, the night quiet around them. She twisted her hands in her lap, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was 15 when my pa sold me off. He said it was better than starving. Rollins promised work and promised a roof. But the first night he locked me in a room out back, I knew he had kept me there near 3 years. Said if I ran, he'd find me. And he always did." The scars, her hand touched her side. "Those were his lessons. He wanted me to remember I belonged to him." Jack's fists clenched, his knuckles white, but he didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. "I finally got away when he was drunk and left in the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. I've been running since, and when I fell at your door, I thought I'd run my last mile." Her eyes filled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You should have left me there. You should have never picked me up." Jack leaned forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah, look at me." She did, though her vision blurred. "You ain't his. You never were. He took what wasn't his to take. That don't make you broken, but it makes him a coward and a bastard. And if he comes here, he'll find out I don't scare easy." Her tears spilled harder, but she leaned into him, letting his strength steady her. For the first time, speaking the truth felt less like tearing open a wound and more like letting it bleed so it could finally heal. 2 nights later, the storm broke. Rollins rode onto the ranch with 2 men at his back, shouting for Sarah to come out. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Sarah stood behind him, trembling but unyielding. She was strong. Rollins jeered. "She's mine by right and always was. If you touch this land again," Jack said, his voice low and cold, "it'll be the last thing you do." The standoff stretched, tension crackling like lightning. Rollins shifted in his saddle, eyes darting to the rifle leveled at his chest. His men looked uneasy. Finally, Rollins spat in the dirt. "You ain't worth the bullet," he snarled. "But mark my words, girl, there ain't no man can keep you forever." He wheeled his horse and rode off into the dark. Sarah sagged against the door frame, sobbing with relief. Jack lowered his rifle, but kept his eyes on the horizon until the last hoofbeat faded. Then he turned, pulling her into his arms. "You stood," he whispered against her hair. "You faced him," her hands clutched his shirt, her body still shaking, "only because you were here." Jack drew back just enough to look into her eyes. "No, Sarah, you did it. Don't you ever forget that." The stars burned bright overhead, the land white and endless. And for the first time, Sarah believed him. She wasn't a possession. She wasn't a shadow, but a woman who had survived hell and stood in the light again. And though fear still lingered and though scars still marked her, she knew now she wasn't alone. Jack's vow wasn't just words but life, steady as the land beneath her feet. Thank you for watching Saddle and Sixskin. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content and subscribe for more interesting stories of the Old West.